selecting your tree, oh man, I could talk for days on different types of trees. We've got so many great trees, and even in Nebraska, tons of them will grow great. All of them that you guys were listing are awesome trees. Ginkgos are great, lots of different things. So when you're selecting your tree, first of all, think of what do you want from your tree. So that's things like flowering. Do you want the spring flowering, or some of them will flower a little bit later? Are you looking for that flower from the tree? Are you looking for fall color? Are you looking for shade? Is it a windbreak tree? Is it for erosion control? There's a lot of different aspects to think about. Hey, wait, John, did you hit record? Okay, you did. I just wanted to make sure. So there's a lot of different aspects to think about when choosing your tree, but you also have to think about what's going to fit in that size, in that space that you have for that tree. So you don't want it to be, you know, you don't want to plant a bur oak in a lot of home yards. I do have one, but I have a very large yard. So I've got the space for it, but in a lot of home yards, it might be a little too big. So you've got to think about the space too. Look up, look down, look all around when you're planting that. Fit the tree to the space, not the, or fit the, you want to make sure that the tree is going to fit in the space. You don't want to have to prune it to fit it into that space. And remember, no tree is perfect. So a lot of times we get those unrealistic expectations for a tree. So people want it that it's, you know, 25 to 40 feet tall, drops the leaves early and all at once. You don't get a messy tree, and disease resistance, great spring color, but great fall color. Okay, you can't get all of these things, right? And there's no tree that doesn't have some type of a mess. So you just have to be aware of that going in, that, yeah, you're going to have some of these things, and you can't have everything you want in one tree. And then the other thing to think about is starting with a good tree. So we talked a little bit beforehand. I think one of you was looking for a sawtooth oak and where to get it. And so the places you'll notice that we were mentioning were all locally sourced. And you're going to go a lot better with a locally sourced tree because it's going to be kind of adapted to our environment. A lot of times when we get trees, you know, box stores and things, they might ship them in from the south. And yeah, it's probably adapted for our hardiness zone, but if it started in the south, it's used to the weather in the south. So they don't always do as well up here. And then make sure it is adapted for your hardiness zone. So there we go. The hardiness zone map shown here for those of you who don't know. Most of the southern part of the state is going to be in that 5B zone. And then most of the way through the center part of the state and even most of the northern part is going to be in that, let's see, 5A, and then maybe a little bit into the 4B. So make sure it is in your zone when you're picking your tree. So like Lincoln and Omaha, where I'm at in Gage County, we're all in that 5B zone. And like right here is going to be in the 6th zone. So we're right on the edge, but and some people will try to put a tree that's maybe a zone 6 into our zone, and they might do okay sometimes, but eventually there's going to be a really cold winter or something that's going to knock them back. So other things to think about, using native and well-adapted trees. Okay, so we're not using, it doesn't necessarily all have to be native trees because there's a lot of well-adapted trees that will grow just fine in Nebraska. But when you're going with those kinds versus like the, you know, something from China or Japan, those aren't from our area, right? And maybe they aren't as well adapted. So if we go with those native and well adapted ones, they're more prepared to deal with Nebraska weather. You're going to have less need for that watering once they're established. You're going to have fewer damaging pests because if they build up together, the pest and the plant, they're going to have less problems. They're going to be able to survive that better. And then in turn, then our trees are going to live longer and thrive. And diversity is key, okay? This is the hard part. So with tree diversity, the previous recommendations, they used to say 10% of all your trees from one species, 20% from a genus, and 30% from a family. And that's really a good guideline. But Dr. John Ball, he's with South Dakota State, his new recommendation is to do just 5% from any genus. Because if you go with the 10% from one species, you could have 10% white ash and 10% green ash, and then you're still very vulnerable to something like emerald ash borer, because you still have quite a bit of ash out there. So he's going with just a generalization, 5% from one genus as a blanket statement. And I think that works pretty well to help make sure that we don't have these problems. Because what happens when we get a lot of the same tree, and we've seen this happen, we get a total annihilation that comes through. So we've seen this with chestnut blight. You know, we had all the chestnuts lining the streets. And then we replaced those with elms. And then we got Dutch elm disease. And then we replaced all those with ashes. And now we have emerald ash borer. And so when we keep going in with all of these monocultures where we have all the same type of tree down a street, or a windbreak, we lost all of our most of our windbreaks due to pine wilt. In those monoculture situations, you lose the whole thing. If you had a lot more diversity, you might lose, you know, a third or even, you know, a few of the trees, but not all of them, right? So when we're planting a new tree or selecting our new tree, you want to look around your yard, what you've got, and you want to look around your neighborhood so you've got a lot of diversity. The biggest, you know, I love to tell this story. My dad one time was planting a new tree, and I said, "What are you going to plant?" He said, "A maple." I said, "Dad, how many maples do you already have?" He says, 2 or 3. I said, "Let's plant something different, Dad." So I convinced him to plant a sycamore, and he loves it. So just something different so that he didn't have all the same tree, right? Because then something comes through, attacks those maples, then he loses all the trees in his yard. So we don't want to do that. So with tree diversity, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit, if the plants evolve with the pest, it's easier for that plant to resist the damage. So that's what happens. We get native pests and native trees, they can evolve together. The problem that we see is when it's an invasive pest to a native tree, or a native pest with an invasive tree or a non-native tree, right? So that's where more of the problems happen. And your pests are going to be specific to a genus or a species, really. So if a genus is found, if a tree genus is found on only one continent or doesn't have very many species, it's likely to have fewer pest problems. So that's why trees like ginkgo, Kentucky coffee tree, yellowwood, catalpa, Siberian larch, these kinds of trees are going to have a lot less problems. I remember when I saw John Ball talk on tree diversity at an arborist convention, he was talking ginkgo. It's a great tree because it, you know, there's no other species of ginkgos, right? So it doesn't have a lot of pest problems because of that. So then we look at the overplanted things. And I'm not saying that these trees are bad necessarily. I'm just saying that they're way overplanted, because everybody loves a Bradford pear in the spring. They're beautiful. They smell amazing. I love it. But they are overplanted. And those are actually becoming a little bit invasive in some states. Things like the autumn blaze maple. If you don't have one, I guarantee you a neighbor or someone else in your neighborhood has an autumn blaze maple. You can find an autumn blaze maple by just a short little walk, I would imagine. So they're pretty overplanted. And those red maple, silver maple crosses, we use a lot of those because they're fast growing and people like them. They have good fall color. Even the river birch, Norway maple, the American linden. I have 2 in my front yard. I do like a linden. I think they're a great tree. But Jody could tell you why we don't like lindens, right? With the Japanese beetles, I won't make you talk, Jody. But that is a problem with those. And so we do have a lot of them, and we get a lot of problems from the Japanese beetles. And of course, honey locust is overplanted, and that's partially their own fault. They've moved themselves, right? So I'm just going to talk a little bit on some of these trees. John did send you, when you got the link for tonight's program, a list. I got a list from the Forest Service on eastern Nebraska trees and western Nebraska trees. And so that's a list straight from the Forest Service on those. And so it's got plenty of good options for you. And so I just kind of wanted to talk through a few of them. So some underutilized small trees. So these are the 20-foot or so. This one here is the pawpaw, which John Porter talked about. That this one does produce an edible fruit. I've not tried it, but I hear it tastes like bananas. So I need to go and see if I can get one from, you know, the pawpaw on campus or something, and see if I can try one sometime. But they're supposed to taste like bananas, but it is a native tree. It is an understory tree, so you don't want to just put it out in the middle of your yard, right? It's not where you plant your oak or your Kentucky coffee tree or anything like that. But it's a really good one, and it's got that really large tropical foliage, but it will sucker, like John said, and it kind of forms a colony, and you get lots of them in the area, right? And Terry says that the fruits from pawpaw make a wonderful fritter. Ooh, I'm gonna have to try that. That sounds delicious. So this one's a really fun one. The dwarf chinkapin oak is a really good one. George Pinkerton, who we talked about, is starting his nursery down in Wymore. I think I got the right town there. He really likes this dwarf chinkapin oak, and it might work. I think he's mentioned it as kind of an under power lines kind of tree because it stays real small, but it's still a good oak for you. So that's a good choice. Shantung maple is one. We don't see a lot of this one, but it's one that's on the list, and it grows about 15 feet by 15 feet. And what the Forest Service said is it's proving to be reliable in the area. So they're still kind of, I mean, it's still fairly new to the area, but it's seeming to work out pretty well. It is a Chinese native, but has really good fall color. The leaves are going to emerge kind of a reddish purple and then turn a glossy green, and then get you this pretty orange, bronzy fall color. And then this is hornbeam. And I just like this one because of the bark. And some of the trees that I like are just because of the bark, because it's such a unique characteristic on these trees. This is the one they also call musclewood because it kind of looks like mussels on the bark. This one will grow 20 by 20. It's got the catkins for flowers. And then you get this nice bronzy color in the fall. But it does have some considerable variation in that fall color. So that's another good one. If you're going for the medium-sized tree, this is the 20 to 40 foot tall ones. Ohio buckeye is one, and we don't see a lot of Ohio buckeye. I'm trying to think the last one that I've seen out in, you know, the Beatrice area. There's probably a couple, but I don't see them very often. So this one's a pretty cool one, and it's a native tree. Gets about 30 by 30, and it's got those cool compound leaves with this buckeye, right? But we don't want to eat this buckeye, it's poisonous, but squirrels like it. But it's got a nice yellow to pumpkin orange colored fall color, so it's a pretty cool one for fall. And it's a real close relative of the horse chestnut, also has that compound leaf like that. And then the sweet gum, we just don't plant enough of those. And in Southeast, they do pretty well. We do get them in the Beatrice area that I've had calls. The sweet gum is the one with the pod that's very pokey. And so one of the calls I remember, they didn't like the pods because they hurt when they were walking around outside. But I mean, they had a sweet gum, so that was cool, I thought. But and then the hop hornbeam, this one is on that medium list, and this one's 20 by 15 foot. And I'm just making sure I wasn't missing a question here. 20 by 15 foot. It's a real slow growing tree, but the good thing about a slow growing tree is that they're resistant to damage from like windstorms and ice storms. And so I think this was in the Durr book I was looking. This one is listed as very resistant to ice storms. You know, when you get that slow growth from things like an oak or a hop hornbeam, or even your Kentucky coffee tree is fairly slow growing, the slower they grow, the stronger they're going to be. So that's the problem with, think of one of your fastest growing trees, a silver maple. The biggest problem with that is it grows so fast. Those branches are they're not attached very well. And so you lose a lot of branches, break a lot of branches in storms and things like that. So that is one of the downfalls with, fast growth. And everyone, they want this instant tree, but you're going to have a lot better quality tree if you let it grow, or if it's one that grows a little slower. It's not going to break as much. And then another one that we really don't use is the Turkish filbert. There is one on campus that I remember studying when I was in college, and I thought it was a really cool tree. They're 45 by 35 in height and width, and they love hot summers and cold winters. So they should just be primed for Nebraska weather. But they don't really have a good fall color, so that is a downfall. Everybody wants that good fall color, but that's all right. But it is, they're doing well in Lincoln and the North Platte area. So for you in the western side, they do really pretty well over there. So those. So then going on to the large trees. So this here is catalpa. This is another one of my favorites because the catalpa, beside it being, it is a native tree, but this one blooms in June with just huge blossoms, white blossoms with a little bit of purple in there. And at that time frame, you don't see a lot of other trees that are blooming at that point of the year. So that's what I like about it. Whenever I suggest it, people say, oh, that's the one with the bean pods, because it has those long, like green bean, they look like giant green bean pods that hang from the tree. And those are messy, right? But you get this, right? In June, this thing is amazing with that giant heart-shaped tropical foliage. Sometimes I see them a lot more often where they grow a little funny. There's one in Beatrice that I think looks like the Whoville Christmas tree. It just kind of grows like up and crooks at the top, and they'll do that sometimes, but they're an awesome tree for a great flower for you. Another native is the hackberry. They do really well here. Shagbark hickory is another one of my favorites, and you can see why looking at the bark. See, I like bark. The shagbark hickory just has this really cool shaggy bark as it gets older and has an amazing golden yellow fall color. So it's a really cool one to use as well. And it's native, and they're going to get about 50 foot tall by about 45 foot wide. These are the ones going to grow just real close together, and they're going to make a real nice forest in some, they'll grow in those wooded areas, do really nice there. And then the other one shown here is the ginkgo. And that ginkgo is, they're going to get, I didn't put the size of this one. They're going to get around, 50-ish feet tall as well. But the cool thing with the ginkgo is the leaf structure on this one with that parallel veination. It's the only broadleaf plant that I can think of. There might be another one or two oddballs that I'm not thinking of, but broadleaf plant with parallel veins. So it's pretty cool, and it's because it's been on Earth for 150 to 200 million years. So they've had this one around for some time. You do want to try to make sure that you get a male. The females, because they have male and female trees, the females produce a fruit that I am told smells like rotting flesh. So that's one you really don't want in your landscape. That's not going to smell very wonderful. The problem with it is it's pretty difficult to determine the sex of these trees because they don't start fruiting until they're about 20 to 50 years old. So you've got to be real careful with that. But basically what I was in the Durr manual here, it says be leery when buying unnamed clones. So if it's got a name, you're going to be a little better off. But do want to be real careful with the ginkgos. They can be a little smelly years down the road. But it is a cool tree. There we go. And then Kelly, I think you said, or one of you said that Kentucky coffee tree was one of your favorites. And it is a cool tree. And in winter, I feel like this one is probably when it looks one of the best because it's got really cool branching habits. And then you see those pods up in the top of the tree, and it just looks so cool. And I like to identify this one in the winter because it doesn't have any leaves on it, but I can still get it right as long as I can find those bean pods. So it's a pretty cool one as well. And it's a native, great winter form. And it's dioecious, so it's male and female, like your ginkgo. And the females produce those large pods. So if you don't like those, you can get a male one. But it is later to leaf out, and it does have a good yellow fall color, but it's also not consistent. And then of course I had to put my bur oak in just because I just had to put this in here. And I just thought of it. The one that I have is a relict bur oak. That's which variety of bur oak it is. I knew it would come to me eventually. These get big, 60 foot tall by about 75 foot wide. They are majestic, amazing trees, just huge. And I love them just kind of out on their own, like this picture here out on a hill, just looks cool. And the bark is so gnarly, and the way that they grow is just so unique with that tree. They do have acorns, and this is one that the acorns will mature in 1 year. So some of our acorns take 2 years to mature, so you don't have acorns falling from the tree every year. This is one of the white oaks, so it does produces acorns every year. But it's got a really cool acorn with that fringed cap. The cap comes about half over the acorn itself, so it's a pretty cool one. And this is one, if you're a hunter like me, the deer like bur oak because the acorns are pretty sweet. So if you can hunt near a bur oak, you're going to be pretty good for finding deer because they do like that. So, and then I had to talk about a few evergreen trees. So we've got pines, firs, spruce, junipers, and then your deciduous conifers, basically, when you're talking about evergreen trees. With the pines, you just want to stay away from Scotch pine and Austrian pines because those two can get the pine wilt pretty heavily. But ponderosa can be used, and they do pretty well. White pine is probably my favorite pine. So they're wispy. The leaves or the needles, they're just held so wispy, and they're nice, soft needles. They don't poke me when I'm looking at the tree. And then there's a couple good firs, concolor, and then the balsam, Douglas fir, of course, and then a couple of spruces that we can use. And I know I have Eastern red cedar on here. They're a really good windbreak tree. So I still recommend them as a windbreak tree. I think they do really well in that capacity. This here is a bald cypress that I have shown. Bald cypress is awesome, and it's a deciduous conifer. So it does have green needles like a conifer, but they lose the needles every year, the whole tree. So if you're new to a location, didn't know you had a bald cypress, that's where people call me and say, my tree is turning completely brown. And then I go and look, oh, it's just a bald cypress. It's supposed to do that. So if you don't know, it is a little scary the first time that you see it happen because the entire tree will turn brown and just lose all those needles. The larch will do that as well. And then the concolor fir, that's one, they're gonna curve, the needles curve upward and kind of outward, and they have flat needles. So spruces have square needles, firs have flat, because fir and F and flat and F, and then spruce and square. So that's how you can remember that. But the concolor fir is the most reliable fir for Nebraska, and they're going to get about 50 feet tall by about 25 wide. And then this one here is the Norway spruce, and I really like the Norway spruce because it's got those pendulous branches. So out on the ends of the branches, they put down, it's like a little baby growth of branches that hang downward like the pendulum in a clock. So this one's a pretty cool one. They get big. They get 70 feet tall by about 40 feet wide. So you got to have a lot of space for a Norway, but they are really cool. And then just a few more slides here and we'll get to questions. So trees to avoid planting. So I take out all the ash trees because of emerald ash borer. So if it's a fraxinus, don't plant it. I do, I know that this is where Paul and I differ on our viewpoints, but pin oaks, they are a great tree. However, they're very prone to chlorosis, especially in southeast Nebraska soils. And so, you know, you have to think about that. Are you going to want to have to treat that tree for chlorosis all the time, or you want to plant a different oak? Is kind of where you're at with that. Of course, I mentioned Scotch and Austrian pines, leaving those out because of pine wilt. There's a couple others, os trees. I know people have asked about those. They're very fast growing. They break very easily, got a lot of disease issues, and they are short-lived. So we don't like those. And then the Royal Paulownia, which is an empress tree. And those are considered invasive in the Midwest, in a lot of areas in the Midwest. And they're very fast growing and break easily. So the os tree and the Royal Paulownia, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that one right, the empress tree, those are, I think they used to grow or get them in the like newspaper or magazine clippings. That's where those ones come from. So obviously we're not getting them from a local source. So they're just not great. I think it's the os tree that basically die all the way back to the ground every year, but they're so fast growing that they pop right back up the next year. And that's, you know, it's not going to live long doing that. And then we mentioned the silver maples, where they're very, very fast growing and they often break in storms. And silver maples are they're one of the most prone to decay, the decay fungi. So when they break, which they do often, then they're easily susceptible to decay fungi coming in. And so then you get a lot of that decay through the tree, and it's not for good health and longevity for that tree. And then the Siberian elm is the weedy elm that we don't want. It's very fast growing, breaks in storms. It's not the pretty elm that we like, or the elm hybrids. So this is one that we kind of want to stay away from as well. And I guess I don't have a mulberry on there, but they're a good tree. They produce a lot of great fruits, but the mulberry is also very weedy. If you've got one mulberry, you've got about 500 of them. So just for some more information, if you're looking around at the list that I sent out, you can check them out a little bit more on this Missouri Botanic Garden under their plant finder. So you can go to either of those two links for it. The Minnesota Landscape Arboretum has a good option as well. And then you can just use Google and look up hornbeam, but then do the site.edu, or I do hornbeam, extension, or if you wanted to see if we had something on it, you could do hornbeam, Nebraska extension. So that works pretty well for finding a little more information on there. And then of course the plant list that I sent you. And then these are just a couple of trees. I just did a real quick search on Amazon for a couple of tree guides. And so those will get you really good color photos of them. I was sad to see that there's a new field guide to trees of North America. Mine does not have that picture on the front. So it must be a new edition. But that's a really good, those are really good guides to get you a good color photo of a lot of different types of trees and really kind of help you make an educated decision. And also, you know, if you need more help, you can always find me or any of the experts on here tonight or throughout this series, the virtual series. We'd all be able to help you out. If you've got 2 or 3 you're thinking of, we can help you get a little bit closer to that. So